My ex-husband's 20-something new wife turned around in the front row of my son's high school graduation, looked me dead in the eye, and ripped my reserved name card perfectly in half. His biological mother can stand in the back, she laughed to the usher. She should be used to it. But when my son, the class valedictorian, took the microphone 10 minutes later, he didn't read his graduation speech. Instead, he pulled out a stack of printed Venmo receipts and destroyed her entire life in front of 1,000 people. Before we get into this absolute nuclear revenge, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and welcome to Peegyn. Drop a comment right now telling me what city or country you're watching from. We post the craziest Reddit stories every single day. Now let's get into it. My name is Elena. I am 44 years old. And for the last 18 years, I worked 2 grueling, soul-crushing jobs so that my son, Julian, could sit in a front row somewhere that actually mattered. I want to tell you about those 18 years before I tell you what happened at the graduation ceremony. Because if you don't understand the blood, sweat, and tears of the last 2 decades, you will not understand why I didn't completely lose my mind and attack that woman in the auditorium. You might think I was weak. I wasn't weak. I was strategic. And strategic patience often looks exactly like weakness to arrogant people. My ex-husband, Richard, and I got married when I was 25. Julian was born a year later. Back then, Richard was a junior loan officer at a regional bank. He was chasing every shiny, expensive thing that promised to make him look wealthy. When Julian was 6 years old, Richard came home on a random Tuesday evening and told me he had outgrown me. That was the exact word he used. Like I was a cheap sweater he bought at a thrift store. He had met a young paralegal at his firm. He was filing for divorce. He wanted the house, and he asked me to find somewhere else to live. I will never, ever forget the look on my 6-year-old son's face that night. Julian was clutching his Batman pajamas, standing in the hallway, trying to figure out why his mommy was sitting on the cold kitchen linoleum, sobbing into a dish towel. I wiped my face, picked him up, and told him we were going on a grand adventure. We slept on my sister Morgan's couch for 2 months. Eventually, I found a tiny, rundown 1-bedroom apartment sitting directly above a noisy 24-hour laundromat. The rent was cheap, the heating was a joke, and the bathroom door didn't even close all the way. But Julian had his own bed in the 1-bedroom. I slept on a pull-out couch in the living room, and we survived. Richard's child support checks were never quite what the family court judge ordered. He always had a convenient, bulletproof excuse. A bad financial quarter, a massive new car payment, unexpected cash flow issues. Whenever I threatened to take him back to court, his second wife, a woman who lasted exactly 3 years before he cheated on her too, would aggressively flood the court clerk with counterpaperwork until the judge told us to just figure it out ourselves. So I figured it out. I worked the brutal 5 a.m. to 1 p.m. shift cleaning biohazard bins and exam rooms at the Oak Ridge Medical Center 6 days a week. After my shift, I would pick Julian up from public school, cook him dinner, check his homework, and put him to bed. Then, from 9 p.m. until 3 o'clock in the morning, I sewed. I had struck a deal with a local dry cleaner to handle all of their overflow alterations. He paid me strictly in cash. $5 to hem a pair of pants, $10 to fix a broken zipper, $30 to perfectly tailor a men's suit. On a good week, I made an extra $200. On a great week during wedding season, I made $300. I didn't take a single vacation for 14 years. Julian never had a designer winter jacket. He never had a pair of brand new Air Jordans. But he had clean clothes that I had tailored to fit him perfectly, stacks of free library books, and a mother who actually showed up. By 2nd grade, Julian was reading at a middle school level. By 4th grade, he was doing advanced pre-algebra. The head pediatrician at the clinic I cleaned noticed Julian reading a medical textbook in the waiting room one afternoon. She pulled me aside and told me, "Elena, your son is profoundly gifted. Do not let the public school system ignore him." I didn't let them ignore him. I drove him to a specialized magnet school 45 minutes each way. I drove him to advanced robotics competitions in church basements. I drove him to the state math decathlon in a borrowed, rusted-out Toyota that overheated twice on the highway. Richard, on the other hand, was what I like to call a Facebook father. In 12 years, Richard physically showed up to exactly 3 events. He came to the regional science fair when Julian won first place. Richard threw his arm around Julian, took a photo holding the gold trophy, and instantly posted it to Facebook with a caption, "So incredibly proud of my boy. Blood, sweat, and tears." He got 200 likes, and then he left before the ceremony was even over. Richard missed the 103-degree fevers. He missed the 2 a.m. panic attacks over AP calculus exams. He missed the afternoon Julian came home with a split lip because a bully called him a welfare kid, and my small, skinny son had thrown the first punch. Richard missed all of it. I didn't miss a single second. If you have ever had to deal with a deadbeat parent who only shows up for the photo ops, smash the like button right now to show Elena some support. Here is the thing about Richard's third wife, Tiffany. She didn't just show up at the high school graduation and randomly steal a chair. Stealing the seat was the final, arrogant move in a deeply toxic psychological game she had been playing for 2 straight years. Richard married Tiffany 18 months ago at a lavish, $100,000 destination wedding in Napa Valley. Julian was expressly not invited. Richard cowardly told his son that it was an adults-only event, but Tiffany posted dozens of photos featuring her wealthy nieces and nephews dancing at the reception. Tiffany was 27 years old. Richard was 46. Tiffany was what modern society calls an influencer. She had around 90,000 followers on Instagram and TikTok, where she desperately tried to cultivate a brand as a wealthy, put-together lifestyle guru. The nightmare started when she decided to pivot her content into the bonus mom niche. One weekend, Julian came home from his mandated visitation at Richard's massive house looking physically sick. He handed me his phone. Tiffany had posted a perfectly color-graded, highly edited photo of herself drinking an expensive matcha latte, with Julian completely out of focus in the background, quietly doing his homework at the kitchen island. The caption read, "The stepmom life is so exhausting, but so rewarding. He doesn't say much to me, but I see his struggles. Hashtag bonus mom, hashtag blended family." Julian had barely spoken 3 words to her all weekend. He hated being filmed without his consent. I told Julian to politely text her and ask her to take the photo down. She didn't take it down. Instead, she posted a passive-aggressive follow-up video complaining to her followers about the toxic challenges of blending families when the bitter biological mother tries to control everything. She actually landed a paid sponsorship with a skincare brand off the drama. I had enough. I called Diane, a shark of a family law attorney who had handled my initial divorce. Diane is a 50-something woman who wears her reading glasses on a pearl chain and takes absolutely zero disrespect. "Elena, honey," Diane said over the phone. "Julian is 17. In our state, a minor over the age of 14 has full legal standing to request a formal cease and desist for the unauthorized commercial monetization of their image. Have Julian write her a short email. Have him CC my law firm. We won't sue her yet. We will just legally remind her that we exist." Julian sent the email. Tiffany immediately deleted the videos. But she absolutely did not forgive me. She realized I wasn't just a poor cleaner she could step on. I was a threat to her digital brand. After the lawyer's letter, her petty retaliation began. Suddenly, my text messages to Julian would mysteriously fail to deliver whenever he was logged onto Richard's home Wi-Fi. The dates for Julian's college touring events would conveniently be communicated to me incorrectly. The $500 deposit for Julian's summer engineering camp, which Richard was legally obligated to pay, was accidentally lost in the mail by Tiffany, forcing me to drive to their gated community at 9 p.m. and demand a physical check on the deadline day. Diane, my lawyer, started a physical manila folder. She labeled it the Tiffany file. By the time graduation day arrived, that folder was 94 pages thick. I woke up at 5 a.m. on the day of graduation. I couldn't sleep. I had spent 2 hours the night before meticulously altering a $60 navy blue dress I bought on clearance at a Macy's outlet, so it would fit me perfectly. Julian was already awake, sitting at the small kitchen table in his dark green graduation gown, eating cereal and typing furiously on his laptop. "Mom," Julian said, not looking away from the screen, "I need you at the high school auditorium at exactly 8:30 a.m. Do not be late. I'm never late, Julian. I know, he said, finally closing the laptop. But today, seriously, do not be late. He looked up at me. He had Richard's eyes, but there was an intense, calculated sharpness to them that he inherited entirely from me. I love you, Mom, Julian said quietly. And I mean it. I know exactly what you sacrificed for me. I had to sit down. Julian was a deeply analytical kid. He didn't usually do emotional speeches over breakfast. I swallowed the lump in my throat, drank my cheap coffee, and drove him to the school. When I dropped him off in the parking lot, he hugged me tight and pointed to his graduation cap. He had painted something on the top in bright white letters, but from my angle, I couldn't read it. Row 2, seats 3 and 4, Julian whispered in my ear. I reserved them for you and Aunt Morgan. The absolute best seats in the house. I drove back to my apartment, picked up my sister Morgan, and we returned to the high school at 8:15 a.m. As we walked across the sprawling asphalt parking lot toward the auditorium doors, Morgan grabbed my arm like a vice grip. Morgan was a former middle school vice principal. She had a terrifying radar for bad behavior. Elena, Morgan hissed. Why is Richard's brand new Range Rover parked illegally in the handicap spot? And why is his shiny new wife filming us through the windshield? I looked over. Sure enough, Tiffany was sitting in the driver's seat of the luxury SUV. Her phone was pressed against the glass. The camera lens pointed directly at us as we walked in our cheap dresses. I forced myself to smile. I gave her a polite little wave. She did not wave back. The high school auditorium held roughly 1,000 people. The seating was strictly reserved for the families of the graduates. Morgan and I walked proudly down the center aisle. I wasn't naive. I knew exactly what the wealthy parents in this school district saw when they looked at me. A 44-year-old single mother in a clearance rack dress, with hair I had cut myself in my bathroom mirror. We reached row 2. The seats were taken. Richard was sitting in seat 4. Tiffany was sitting in seat 3. She was wearing a stunning cobalt blue designer bandage dress that probably cost 3 months of my rent. The heavy, white cardstock name placards that Julian had personally placed on those chairs an hour ago were completely gone. In their place were 2 brand new, printed cards that read, Richard Evans and Tiffany Evans. I froze in the aisle. Richard, I said softly. Richard flinched. It was a microscopic, cowardly little flinch that he instantly tried to suppress. Elena. Hey, Richard stammered, refusing to make eye contact. Yeah, there was a massive mix-up with the administration. Tiffany talked to the school faculty. They moved us up to the front row for the photos. I looked down at the floor. Peeking out from under Tiffany's designer high heels were the torn shreds of my name card. Elena Evans, ripped violently down the middle like a piece of garbage. Those were my reserved seats, I said, my voice shaking slightly. Tiffany didn't even bother to look up from her iPhone screen. Honey, Tiffany sighed, scrolling through Instagram. His biological mother can easily watch from the standing room in the back. She should be totally used to it by now. And then she laughed. It was a light, musical, venomous laugh of a woman who had never suffered a single consequence in her entire privileged life. Richard didn't say a word. He didn't defend me. He just stared blankly at his graduation program. Morgan's hand clamped onto my wrist. I could feel her physically vibrating with rage. Elena, Morgan whispered in my ear. Let me drag this little girl out of this auditorium by her expensive hair right now. I will gladly take the assault charge. No, I whispered back. Do not ruin Julian's day. Before Morgan could argue, an usher appeared at my elbow. He was a nervous-looking 19-year-old kid wearing a cheap clip-on bow tie and a name tag that read Tyler. He was sweating profusely. Ma'am, I am so sorry, Tyler stammered, refusing to meet my eyes. The VIP seats up front are officially taken. You will have to stand back there. Tyler pointed to the absolute back of the massive auditorium, right underneath the buzzing red neon exit sign. I looked back down at Tiffany. She finally looked up from her phone. She looked me dead in the eyes, and she winked at me. Then, she lifted her phone, tilted it at a 45-degree angle, and pretended to take a selfie while secretly recording my reaction for her followers. I let Tyler the usher walk me all the way to the back wall. I stood under the red neon light. I did not cry. because I realized in that moment that if I gave them even one single second of a dramatic scene, 18 years of being the steady, reliable mother would be instantly erased in a 15-second viral TikTok video. I had not survived 18 years of bleeding for this kid just to become the punchline of Tiffany's Instagram story. So I stood in the shadows. I took a deep breath, and I waited. I didn't actually know that Julian was the class valedictorian until the principal announced his name over the loudspeakers. Julian had kept it an absolute secret from me. I would find out later that he kept it a secret because he was trying to guarantee that the speech he had been meticulously writing for 3 weeks would land with maximum, uninterrupted devastation. He didn't want anyone in our family to accidentally leak his plan. When Dr. Vance stepped up to the podium and proudly announced, "It is my distinct honor to introduce the class of 2026 valedictorian Julian Evans," my knees actually buckled. The entire auditorium erupted into deafening applause. 1,000 people got to their feet. Richard proudly stood up first. He clapped loudly, his chest puffed out, basking in the glory of son he had absolutely no hand in raising. Tiffany stood up right next to him, her iPhone instantly raised high in the air, recording the moment for her brand sponsors. I watched Julian walk up the wooden steps to the stage. He didn't look at Richard. He didn't look at Tiffany. He looked over the heads of 1,000 people straight to the absolute back wall of the room, right under the red exit sign where I was standing. And his eyes went completely, terrifyingly cold. Julian stepped up to the microphone. He looked down at his printed graduation speech. He picked it up, folded it precisely in half, and shoved it into the inside pocket of his graduation gown. 1,000 people went dead silent. The principal, Dr. Vance, took a nervous half-step forward. Julian leaned into the microphone. His voice was low, deep, and perfectly steady. "I had a standard speech prepared today," Julian echoed through the massive speakers. "It was about gratitude. It was about thanking the people who actually got me here." He paused. The silence in the room was suffocating. Tiffany slowly lowered her iPhone. But this morning, somebody in this very room did something that I absolutely will not forgive. Julian's eyes flicked down to the second row. Tiffany's smug smile didn't disappear. It cracked. It froze on her face like a mask on a corpse. Richard turned in his seat slowly, like a man paralyzed in a nightmare. "Julian," Richard mouthed silently. Julian ignored him. He raised his hand and pointed a finger directly at Tiffany. 600 heads turned in unison. Hundreds of cell phones instantly rose into the air to record the drama. "You sit in that stolen seat," Julian's voice boomed through the microphone, "and you arrogantly think that nobody saw what you did. You think my father's money makes you completely untouchable." Tiffany frantically grabbed Richard's arm. I could see her knuckles turn pure white. "Do something," she hissed. Richard couldn't move. I was married to the man for almost a decade. I had seen him navigate every crisis a coward can face, and I have never seen him look the way he looked right then. He looked like a man watching his own execution. "Before I accept this diploma," Julian continued, his voice dropping into a lethal register, "I'm going to tell every single person in this auditorium exactly who you are and exactly what you maliciously did to my mother this morning." Julian reached into the inside pocket of his gown. He didn't pull out a speech. He pulled out the shredded, torn piece of white cardstock with my name on it. Elena Evans. He held it up high for the cameras to see. "I have the school's interior security footage," Julian announced. "I have the text messages. And I have the financial receipts." Tiffany's jaw literally dropped open. Richard's face turned the color of wet concrete. In about 30 seconds, Julian leaned into the mic. "This entire community is going to know exactly why my father's new wife is about to lose absolutely everything." Here's exactly what Julian knew. He knew it because Julian, my brilliant, hyper-analytical son, had spent 6 weeks quietly preparing for a contingency plan. He knew it because my attorney, Diane, had taken Julian out to lunch a month ago and warned him, "Your stepmother is escalating her behavior. Be ready." And he knew it because at 8:47 a.m. that morning, Julian had placed the name cards on the chairs, walked out of the auditorium, and then immediately doubled back into the school's media closet to watch the live security feed. Julian, as the president of the school's AV club, had full access to the cameras. He had sat in the dark and watched Tiffany walk down the aisle, tear my name card into pieces, replace it with her own, and take a smiling selfie. But the security footage wasn't the nuclear bomb. The nuclear bomb was the text messages. Julian pulled a thick stack of printed papers out from under the wooden podium. 2 hours ago, Julian said into the microphone, his voice dripping with venom, "My father's wife paid a 19-year-old student $500 to humiliate my mother. She ordered him to force my mother to the back of the room." The crowd gasped collectively. A woman in the third row literally covered her mouth. "I have the Venmo receipts," Julian yelled. "I have a text thread where she wrote, 'Make sure the ex-wife stays in the back. I want her humiliated. Richard needs to see who belongs here.'" Julian slammed the papers down on the podium. "My mother scrubbed biohazard bins at a medical clinic at 5 a.m. and sewed wedding dresses until 3 a.m. every single day for 18 years to send me to this school. She did not miss a single parent-teacher conference. I am a valedictorian because of her, not because of a father who abandoned me, and absolutely not because of his pathetic, arrogant wife." Julian pointed to the back of the room, directly at me. 1,000 people turned around to look at me, standing under the red exit sign. I didn't flinch. I kept my head held high, and I let them look. Julian picked up a heavy manila envelope from the podium. "This envelope is going directly to my mother's attorney," Julian announced. "Along with everything else we have been legally collecting on this woman for the last 2 years." Tiffany violently stood up. She kicked her chair back, so hard it knocked into the person behind her. She grabbed her designer purse and tried to sprint for the side aisle. That is when Dr. Vance, the principal, subtly nodded his head. Officer Briggs, the massive, 6-foot, 3-armed school security officer who had been standing by the stage, smoothly stepped into the center aisle. He didn't touch Tiffany. He just stood there like a brick wall, completely blocking her escape. Tiffany was trapped. Julian leaned back into the microphone for the final blow. "Dad," Julian said, looking at Richard, "I love you, but you have never been a father. You have just been a face in a Facebook photo. My mother raised me, and anyone in this room who calls that woman my bonus mom can stop right now. She's not my family. And after today, she won't be in yours either." Julian took off his graduation cap and held it up to the cameras. The white paint on top finally became visible to the crowd. In massive block letters, it read, "Row 2 or Row 22. You're always front row to me, Mom." The auditorium absolutely exploded. I have never in my life heard a sound like that. 1,000 people lost their minds. Students were screaming and stomping on the bleachers. Teachers were openly weeping. Officer Briggs stood in the aisle, allowing himself a massive, satisfied grin. My sister Morgan was aggressively sobbing and laughing at the exact same time. I was not crying. I stood under the red light, looking at the man my son had become, and I just thought, we did it. He's going to be okay. The aftermath was swift, brutal, and absolute. The video of Julian's speech was ripped from the school's live stream and hit TikTok and YouTube within an hour. By the next morning, it had 6 million views. By Friday, it had 40 million. Tiffany's Instagram account was mass-reported and deleted within 3 days. Every single skincare and tea brand she had sponsored publicly dropped her and issued apologies. But the real damage came from my lawyer, Diane. 7 weeks later, Richard filed for a catastrophic divorce. The grounds for the divorce included a horrifying piece of financial intelligence that Diane had uncovered in the Tiffany file. During the 18 months of their marriage, Tiffany had been quietly siphoning massive amounts of money out of Richard's joint bank accounts. She had routed it through fake Venmo transactions and offshore Cash App accounts. The forensic accountant proved that Tiffany had stolen exactly $147,000 from her own husband. Richard, the man who claimed he couldn't afford a $500 child support check for a decade, had been hemorrhaging $150,000 to a woman who was spending it on Cartier bracelets and private wellness retreats in Cabo with her 20-something personal trainer. The prenuptial agreement held up perfectly. Tiffany was evicted from the gated community with absolutely nothing but a suitcase. I genuinely do not know where she lives now, and I do not care. 3 months later, I was driving my beat-up Honda Accord down the highway, helping Julian move into his dorm at Stanford University on a full-ride academic scholarship. We were 3 hours into the drive. The radio was playing softly. "Mom," Julian said quietly, staring out the passenger window. "I want you to know a secret." "Okay." I asked. I knew about Tiffany paying Tyler the usher before she even did it. I slowly turned my head to look at him. "What?" "Tyler the usher is in my AP physics class." Julian smiled. "He texted me at 7 a.m. that morning. He was panicking. He asked me what he should do about my crazy stepmom offering him $500 to humiliate you." I stared at him in shock. "Julian, what did you tell him?" "I told him to take her money," Julian said, his eyes gleaming. "I told him to take the $500, do exactly what she asked, and then immediately screenshot the entire text thread and Venmo receipt and send it to me." I gripped the steering wheel. "Julian, she was going to do it anyway." "I know she was, Mom," he said. "With or without Tyler, she was going to steal your seat. I just made absolutely sure it was caught in 4K resolution with a paper trail." I had to pull the car over. I pulled onto the gravel shoulder of the highway, put the car in park, and stared at the steering wheel for a full minute. And then I started laughing. I laughed so hard my ribs hurt, because I realized in that exact moment that the boy I had raised on cheap rice, library books, and 2 a.m. calculus had never needed me to protect him from the wolves. I had spent 18 years teaching him to be careful, to be quiet, to be strategic, and to wait for the perfect moment to strike. He had been listening the entire time. When a moment came, he didn't panic. He baited the trap himself, and he waited for the predator to step right into it. I pulled the car back onto the highway. "I love you so much, Julian," I smiled. "I know, Mom," he replied softly. "Row 22 was always good enough for us. They just didn't know it." If you think Julian delivered the greatest graduation speech of all time, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another story. Leave a comment down below rating this nuclear revenge from 1 to 10. Thanks for watching, Peegyn, and I will see you guys in the next video.